Good morning and welcome to Oventus Medical's presentation at the NWR virtual conference. Oventus is a Brisbane-based medical device company that is commercialising a unique treatment platform for sleep apnea and snoring. The company has a collaborative sleep physician dental strategy that streamlines patients' access to the treatment. The Oventus lab model incorporates digital tech via intraoral scanning to achieve operational efficiencies, accuracy, and ultimately patient outcomes. Today from the company, we've got Managing Director and CEO, Chris Hart. In terms of any questions that anyone has, please make sure you send them through via the Q&A box down the bottom. But Chris, I'll hand it over to you. Thanks very much.
Great, thanks Simon, and thanks everyone for dialing in what seems to be a new normal for investor presentations. And as Simon mentioned, we're a medical device company operating in the sleep apnea space. We've got a proprietary treatment for sleep apnea. It's a mouth guard with some integrated airway technology, an integrated airway that allows us to bypass multiple levels of obstruction, and then a positive end expiratory pressure valve which ramps pressure and regulates breathing to inflate the airway instead of using a pump to inflate the airway for sleep apneic patients. Our clinical trial program has shown that we can successfully treat over 80% of patients with sleep apnea compared to sort of 55% for a standard mouth guard. In the US, there's around about 30 million sleep apneic patients, of which 6 million have been diagnosed, and at least half of them have abandoned therapy. So even if we sold a device to those patients alone, it's a $2.4 billion opportunity. We did launch what we call our lab-in-lab program, which I'll get in shortly. Because we have a unique appliance that spans both the dental and sleep professions, we needed to develop a way for sleep physicians and dentists to collaborate. The dentists are there to manage the dental side of it. The sleep physicians appreciate the physiology behind the technology, probably more so. And so, we set up this collaborative program where dentists and sleep physicians can work together and can also increase their revenue and profits at the same time. We got Optima approval, so our flagship device was approved September last year. We launched our lab-in-lab program. As at the end of this September, we had 57 sites contracted across the US to deliver the technology. We did get knocked down a little bit by COVID. We'd launched 30 sites at the end of September, and half of them are currently physically seeing patients. Within these agreements, we do have quotas, mainly from a regulatory point of view. So we need to assess how many devices we think these sites can deliver per month once it reaches maturity, and we contract around that. At the moment, the launch sites would have 6.6 million annualized revenue. They're not at minimum quotas yet. And then half of them are scanning, and they'd have 3.3 million on annualized revenue. We also introduced a telehealth and now home care response to our lab-in-lab program as a result of COVID-19, and that's increased conversion rates, reduced lead time to revenue, and has allowed us to continue to engage with patients and potential partners through the COVID shutdowns. And we've opened up I wouldn't say post-COVID, but since COVID started, we've reopened, and we're well ahead of where we were pre-COVID, back on track to where we had hoped to have been had COVID not interrupted our growth path. So sleep apnea, we stop breathing multiple times a night. I personally stop breathing about 50 times an hour. It leads to daytime somnolence, reduced effectiveness, increased risk of accidents, and then some long-term comorbidities such as hypertension, heart disease, depression, obesity, and so on. It occurs, as I said, when people snore, but also when they stop breathing when they're asleep. So it's a massive socioeconomic and economic problem in the billions and billions of dollars globally. It's a very serious problem. 1 in 3 adult males affected and 1 in 6 adult females, so very high incidence level as well. The standard treatment at the moment is continuous positive air pressure, or CPAP, which is the mask, the hose, and the pressure pump attached to it. Next line of therapy would be mouth guards or oral appliances that bring the jaw forward, and they're successful around about 56% of the time. So we know CPAP works, but we know that it's not well tolerated, with at least half of patients abandoning therapy in the first year. And in fact, if 100 patients are diagnosed with sleep apnea, 35 will refuse therapy outright, 65 will try CPAP, around about 50 will take one home, and half of them abandon therapy. So we have this enormous pool of untreated patients. And for those patients, just over half of them will achieve a treatment success with a standard mouth guard. And then after that, there's different levels of surgery, which are obviously reasonably invasive as well. And then weight loss and behavioural therapy, not always achievable for many. So there's the CPAP. As I said, we know it works. It can be noisy, uncomfortable, the feeling of claustrophobia or being tethered with air leaks, high pressures, drying of the airways. There are high abandonment rates with CPAP. Our technology, a standard mouthguard will bring the jaw forward to stop the tongue from flopping back. The problem is that there's more than one level of obstruction in the airway, so nasal resistance or congestion leads to negative pressures building up in the airway, which then leads to everything closing shut. And that can happen at the soft palate level, which is the punching bag at the back of your throat. The side walls can collapse in, the tongue can flop back, and the epiglottis can prolapse. If we bring the jaw forward, we're dealing primarily with a tongue-based obstruction. If you look at our incorporated airway there, or second nose as we call it, it allows the air to pass below the nasal obstruction, the nasal resistance, and below the soft palate collapse. We've shown through a clinical trial program by allowing that air to flow in, the closing pressure or the negative pressure that's generated is reduced to the same level as optimized CPAP, which in turn then stops the sidewalls collapsing in, and we're stabilizing the tongue base as any mouth guard would. So it's that added efficacy and success rate that's gotten the attention of sleep physicians in the US in particular. So our clinical trial program, 4 clinical trials, 200 odd patients, we've shown that up to, in fact, probably over 80% now of patients we can treat successfully without CPAP. 30 million Americans suffering from CPAP, 6 million diagnosed, 3 million of them are outside of care. At 800 Australian a unit, around about $2.4 billion opportunity. And we also have recurring revenue with consumables associated with those sales. Oral appliances at the moment are about 10% of the therapeutic market. They're forecast to grow at twice the rate of CPAP in the coming years. There again is just an example of that airway bypassing nasal and soft palate collapse, neutralising lateral wall collapse and stabilising the tongue base. It's actually the only device that treats the entire upper airway. CPAP can do that, but it pumps air in, and that tends to increase nasal obstruction. That then leads to higher pressure requirements and mouth breathing. That then leads to a full face mask where higher pressures are required again, and that's where treatment tends to fail. So nasal obstruction, multi-level collapse and mouth breathing is the main anatomic reason for mouth guards not to work, and it's also the main reason for CPAP non-adherence to occur. By incorporating the airway into the oral appliance, we've overcome those issues with the O2 vent Optima. In addition to that, we are launching globally our PEEP valve, X-vent. PEEP is positive end expiratory pressure, and PEEP is what CPAP is designed to deliver. This is subject to a 510(k) in the US, available outside the US. We're looking to lodge that submission in the coming months. What the PEEP valve does, we have the benefit of the low resistance inhalation as the valve opens up. Then as the valve closes and we breathe against it, that resistance leads to pressure building up in the airway, and that then inflates the airway and stabilizes it. So we're ordinarily a blocked nose, multi-level collapse and a switch to mouth breathing would lead to a failure of both CPAP and oral appliance. When that occurs with the airway and the PEEP valve, we see a ramping of efficacy and success rates. And in fact, for the vast majority of patients, we get therapy comparable to CPAP, as opposed to 56% for a standard mouthguard. So a significant increase in efficacy and success rates there for a mouthguard. We call it a CPAP in your pocket. So why are oral appliances only 10% of the therapeutic market? Well, the variable effectiveness was a major issue. You'd say to a sleep physician, why don't you treat patients with oral appliances more often? And the first thing they say is it doesn't always work. Once we go through the data with them and the technology and the physiology, they're very comfortable with the technology. And the next thing they'll ask is, well, where can we get it? We were using a traditional referral pathway, but what we found was the multiple bleed points in the complex patient journey led to patients being lost to follow-up. We also knew the sleep docs would say, well, if I refer the patient to a dentist, I'll never see them again, and the dentist is going to charge them $2,000 or $3,000. Because we're a digital workflow company, we didn't need a full dental clinic to deliver the technology. We just needed a one scanner, which we could attach to a laptop anywhere. So we set up a digital workflow that we could deliver the technology within the sleep physician's facilities, be it a sleep lab, a DME distributor of CPAP, or even a sleep physician's rooms. In doing that, we became almost a one-stop shop. We could treat the patient at the point of care. And we also developed programs to share the economic benefit of that between the sleep physician and the dentist. And that collaboration in therapy and economically has been very important in driving adoption of the lab-in-lab program. So here it is, and you can see the sleep doc talking to the patient. If he thinks, you know what, you could be a candidate for an Optima, why don't you pop next score and get scanned? And if you look at that middle photo there, on the bottom left-hand corner of that is our one scanner that we put into the sleep clinics. That gets waved around inside the patient's mouth. We record the anatomy. We design the device in Brisbane. It gets printed, 3D printed in Oregon for the North American market, in Sydney for Australasia, and then it gets shipped to the clinic for fitting to the patient. There's existing HCPCS codes, EO486 for both commercial payers, and we're actually approved by the pricing data analysis contractors to bill the government directly for Medicare patients as well. So that's been a significant breakthrough for us. It's the first unique design of an oral appliance since Medicare started funding oral appliance therapy. It's the first unique design that's been approved since it was first launched. So Q1 FY21 highlights, 57 sites contracted at minimum quotas, fully launched, 13.2 million in annualised revenue. 30 were launched, 6.6 million in annualised revenue, of which half of them are scanning at 3.3 million annualised revenue at the moment. As we reopen post-COVID, we're trending below quotas, where annualised revenue is a bit over $1 million a year based on the last quarter's booked revenue. Building reasonably quickly though. We implemented telehealth across the sites, so when COVID broke and people were home sheltering, the sleep physicians switched really quickly to telehealth. Telehealth has exploded in the US, as I'm sure it has everywhere else. And so we launched a telehealth solution as well, where the sleep physician or their team could hand off to us, and we do a virtual intake of the patient. Previously, they were scheduled with the dentist for initial consultation. When we switched that out for a telehealth consultation, they could be scheduled basically any time. And when our team were educating the patient, we found our conversion rates increased from 50% to about 80%. And we also could shorten the lead time to therapy. At the same time, there were sites, particularly in Colorado and Louisiana, where we lost patient access completely. So we set up a home care extension of that. That pilot was successful, and that's now being launched this quarter across the rest of the US market. We did strengthen our balance sheet during COVID. We've extended our cash runway over a year's worth of cash without revenue. We're building revenue at the moment reasonably quickly. Cash burn reduced further down to $1.6 million per quarter. I think we've responded really well to the short-term impacts of COVID-19. We've increased revenue quite significantly, adjusted our workflows, and now we really have a virtual business model where we can treat sleep apnea with our therapy anywhere, anytime. Booked revenue increased 190% on the previous quarter in the same period last year. Bit of a lag between booked revenue and receipts. We'd expect to collect the money booked this quarter in the coming quarter. So these are our sites for a visual. We actually launched the clinical business model before we had approval of Otiv and Optima, and that was in June, July last year. We received approval for Otiv and Optima, and then we launched the clinics in the December quarter last year. As we progress, we continue to negotiate and sign agreements, and in these agreements, we contract with the sites to deliver our therapy to the patients within the sites. They're existing patients at the sleep facility. And remember, those 3 million patients that are diagnosed outside of care and patients that are newly diagnosed are patients of the sleep physicians, the sleep labs, and the DME distributors of CPAP. So it was important for us to be able to deliver our technology using the same workflows and patient flow that they normally treat the patient with CPAP. And that the adoption of those lab-in-lab contracts has been quite rapid, given that it's an entirely new clinical business model. We were launching sites out of contracted sites. By the end of the March quarter, we'd launched 14 out of the contracted sites. I think we had 42 at that point. We continued to negotiate through COVID, and we launched sites virtually. We got down to 3 sites at one point, and since we've come out of COVID, we've been increasing the number of sites physically seeing patients at the rate of 3 or 4 a month. We were at 15 at the end of the September quarter, and we've continued to relaunch and launch sites since we've been trading out of COVID. But enormous potential there, and you can see there are sites that are contracted but not launched. The way we launch is by region on a hub and spoke model. So we'll go into a region, we'll build out a series of sites across a few groups. We might do 2 or 3 sites out of maybe 7 or 8, get them running right, and then we can quickly extend into the remaining sites within that group. So the majority of the sites that are yet to be launched are additional sites on a hub and spoke basis from the initial launches we've done with the groups that we've contracted. So a lot of potential in those agreements yet to be realised. And as I said, this is our revenue build. We had FDA clearance of Optima in September last year. We launched the first sites. Remember, we had contracted sites prior to approval. We got FDA clearance in September. We launched the sites in October. We were building revenue in December, starting to ramp in March, where it was truncated. Got reduced in terms of access to patients. We continued to engage via telehealth through COVID in the June quarter. Then we reopened the September quarter with a significant improvement in booked revenue and device sales. As I said, we do have a lag between device sale and receipt. Our terms are on the device sale 30 days net of the end of the month, and on the service provision part of the equation 60 days net of the end of the month. So we have a 60 to 90 day lag. We did collect all of the money we billed pre-COVID and through COVID, and we expect to collect last quarter's revenue this quarter, and with some additional revenue coming, as it's a fairly steep revenue build. So, we're seeing additional sites come online, patients booking in. Our telehealth now equates for half of our appointments, and they're growing on average at about 30% month on month. So the conversion rates have strengthened. There is some variability in terms of access of sites, and also some insurers. There are some lags at the moment with insurers due to COVID, but the patient build is definitely building. We're expecting ongoing quarter-on-quarter growth well into next year and beyond. So at the end of September, half of our launch sites were scanning patients. We're bringing them back online. As I said, at 3 or 4 a month, we have 57 contracted sites. We're continuing to negotiate contracts. We did turn around and focus on launches in the last quarter, and also the negotiations to try and build revenue as quickly as possible. Patient flow is subdued. Most sites across North America are reporting reductions in patient flow to the lab of 50%. Having said that, home sleep testing and telehealth has increased, so the patients are there, but they're there virtually. And that's why the launch of our telehealth program was so important. We intend to continue launching and relaunching sites to broaden our base, as well as implementing home care where we don't have access, so that we can continue to grow units and revenue. And from a broader base, as patient flow improves, we're looking for some accelerating growth through calendar 2021. We continue to engage with groups on contract negotiations. If the groups that we have under negotiation signed agreements and we reach their quotas, the funnel deal flow would be worth $70 to $80 million per year annualized. So that, and bearing in mind that we only have half of our launch sites, or we only had half of our launch sites at the end of September treating patients. We have that many again coming back online, plus another 20 or 30 contracted sites, and then a deal funnel of $70, $80 million a year. So there's an enormous growth opportunity as we come out of COVID, and we're very excited about the home care extension and the virtual lab-in-lab program that we've developed via telehealth. So, a real opportunity for us then moving forward. So strategically, we're focusing on relaunching and launching additional sites, getting those sites optimised as much as we can to drive revenue, containing costs at the same time. We are continuing contract negotiations, setting ourselves up for accelerating growth in the years to come, and reducing our COGS. COGS at the moment are about 40%. We've got a series of projects underway over the next quarter or two to reduce those COGS down to 20%, generating an 80% GP margin. As I said, we're putting in our 510K FDA application for XVent, which is the accessory. Optima is approved, and we're starting to launch our lab-in-lab program in other markets, in particular in Australia. Our board, I'm sure many of you know Mel and Sue. We've got some great US non-executive directors, operationally and in terms of investor engagement. They've been a great benefit in addition to the board as well. The board is an extension of our executive team, and we get great support from the board. And in terms of the share registry, I'm still a significant shareholder, are the other founders. Top 20 and founders, insiders constitute over half the share register, with the remaining retail shareholder at 44%. A strong balance sheet, as I said, we raised through COVID over a year's worth of a runway, 4.2 quarters, and we're keeping cash burn low as we build revenue. And happy to take any questions.
Great, thanks, Chris. What has slowed the reopen of launch sites, and when can we expect those sites to reopen?
So it's patient flow primarily, where slum sleep labs don't have any patient flow. Some have patient flow coming back in. So since COVID, also CPAP titration has not been done. In other words, sometimes they put someone in a sleep lab and titrate their CPAP, and if they fail, they become on oral appliance therapy. So the workflow has gone to telehealth. So if you have, where we've seen patient flow come back quickly is where we have a sleep physician-owned sleep lab or facility, because we call it the power of the pen. The sleep physician has the patient in front of them doing telehealth. That's where we see the conversion to therapy. The sleep labs, generally speaking, have reduced flow and they're doing mainly home sleep testing. And again, the next interface is with the sleep physician online. Most sleep physicians at the moment are operating by telehealth. So the reduced patient flow is generally at the sleep labs and the DME distributors. So to trade out of COVID, we focus very much on the sleep physician-owned facilities where they're using telehealth. Now, they are starting to open up again. We've seen some improvements in telehealth ourselves, as I said, 30% month on month. Patient flow is returning. We're opening up sites at 3 or 4 a month, so it is quite a quick reopening and rebuild. There were 3 sites through COVID that we did not reopen, but having said, all of the other sites are there waiting to reopen, and they're just building up patient flows. We're preloading the books with telehealth, so we know which sites where flow is returning, and where we can't get patients into the clinic, then in those instances we'll be introducing home care. So I'd expect to see over the next 2 to 3 months the majority of those sites coming online.
Great, thanks. And when you talk about 15 centres at 3.3 million potential annualised revenue, what are the underlying assumptions behind that?
So that's 20 units per month in some and 10 per month in others. I think I have that on a slide somewhere so I don't get it wrong. 49 sites have quotas of 20 units per month and 8 sites have quotas of 10. Now, those quotas, they're not take or pay, but there are penalties if they don't reach those quotas if we choose to enforce them. In this environment, we're working with the sites to get back up to those quotas. We had a few trending there prior to COVID. We have, I think, 2 or 3 there at the moment, opening back up, and the others are in the early stages of opening. So we'd factored in that they might open at 5 the first month, then 10, then 15, then 20. At the moment, they're averaging about 8 a month, and I think some are at 20, but most of them are sort of between the 5 and 10 mark. So that assumption seems to be accurate. We're hoping that that starts to accelerate a little bit as we get through the back end of this quarter and into the March quarter. So that's selling units to those sites at that minimum quota per month.
Great, thanks. How replicable is the device? Is there sufficient differentiation between a generic produced by Ripoff and one made by Oventus? And does the prospective customer appreciate this from a cost perspective?
So there's no difference in cost to the patient. The cost is determined by the clinic. We sell to the clinic at a wholesale price, so it doesn't influence cost. In terms of protection, there's 8 families of patents to protect against anyone infringing. We also have IP insurance, freedom to operate and protection. We have a very deep moat of IP protection. So the IP, no concern at all. The patient will be recommended or prescribed the therapy. I think it's important to realise that this is a new therapy. It's not a mouth guard and it's not CPAP. And the sleep physicians understand this. So they see this as the first innovation they've seen in decades. It's oral PEEP and airway management combined with mandibular stabilisation. It's the only product on the market that has these features. It shows a 50% reduction in apneic events compared to a standard mouth guard, and it elevates the mouth guard to CPAP-like levels for more than 80% of patients. It is, if you look at the wearing time of 6.15 hours a night, with 70 to 80% of the efficacy of CPAP, the effect on disease is the highest in market. So if you look at the therapy differentiation and the strong IP position, as well as there being no differential in cost and adoption by the stakeholders who control and manage that patient journey, I think we're very well positioned to continue to grow this as a therapy in the US market initially and then globally after that.
Right. What potential issues with the FDA approval do you see and timing for XVent?
Look, there's been a slowdown in responses from the FDA, and that's dragged it out a little bit. It's a 510K application that's been confirmed. We're just preparing the last parts of our application at the moment to submit. I think we're waiting for some biopsy testing, so it will be approved. There's no risk around that. Timing, we were hoping to get it done sometime this year, but it has been slowed down a little bit by COVID. So, we're aiming for next year. We are in the hands of the FDA gods. Our average application's taken 4 months and a 510K. The longest has been 8, I think. So, I'd say somewhere next year we'll definitely have that in market in the US.
And do you have level 1 evidence to support the efficacy of the device?
So we have peer-reviewed data for both Optima and XVent. The Optima published studies, there's 3 or 4, I'm trying to remember exactly which ones were abstracts and which ones were published. So we had a straight efficacy. Then we had a randomized crossover study, airway open, airway closed, which is in draft form, ready to be submitted. We had a randomized crossover, airway open, airway closed, combined with some physiologic studies, which is published, and then combined with that was a nasal resistance study. I guess the most important study is the XVent study published in Sleep, which again was randomized crossover, showing a 30% improvement in efficacy with the PEEP valve, and that was published in Sleep, I think last year in June. So we have 4 peer-reviewed papers, 3 randomized crossover, another 3 accepted for publication, 3 more in draft, and that's 4 clinical trials, over 200 patients. So we're very comfortable with the body of evidence we have supporting adoption of the technology.
Great, thanks, Chris. That concludes the Q&A section. I might just pass it back to you for closing remarks before we finish up there.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. Thanks, everyone, for attending. The team here is very excited about what lies ahead. We've got a huge opportunity with the technology and the clinical business model. We have readjusted and significantly grown revenues through COVID, and we intend to continue to do that quarter on quarter. So, we're just looking forward to seeing the share price reflect the value that we believe we're building.
Right. Thanks very much, Chris, and thanks all for joining.
Thank you.